Greetings and welcome to another lecture in comparative psychology. We're continuing with the topic of animal personalities, talking about other ways in which animal personalities can be described. Coping styles was one of the names that could possibly have been used as a synonym for animal personality. And essentially what they mean here is the same thing that is meant when we use that term for humans. It means, how does this individual cope with stress? How does this individual cope with threats? And there are two basic ways that animals can cope, two basic groupings of behaviors. It's oftentimes divided up into proactive and reactive styles. So proactive generally is when you go out and do something and start something perhaps, and reactive is when you react to something. And indeed, these different techniques of dealing with stressors is found in many species of animals, both domestic and wild. It's also found in humans. There are proactive ways to deal with stress, and there are reactive ways to deal with stress. So this does seem to be something that could be used as a measure of personality. And after all, something to think about, stress can cause health problems for non-human animals as well. It can cause problems in domesticated animals. It can cause problems in wild animals in captivity. It can cause problems in wild animals in the wild. Increased amounts of stress is not good, period. It can cause health issues because of problems with the immune system. It can cause a stereotypy, the stereotypic behavior. It can cause, all sorts of real problems. And so the idea is that with a stressor, the individuals need to react to it. They need to cope with it. And that's where we get proactive versus reactive. Now, proactive, like I said, is when the individual goes out and does something about it. So proactive reaction to stress are things like territorial control and aggression. For instance, if another individual comes into an animal's territory, it may go out and just force that individual to leave. Okay? Can go out and threaten it, or go out and go all the way into, aggression. Anything negative is likely to be actively removed. Whether it's an individual, or in some case, sometimes if something stressful is put into an environment, the individual will actively remove the stressor from the environment. In captivity, if something is in an animal's enclosure that it doesn't want, they will on occasion take that and throw it over the fence, or bury it, or drop it in water, or otherwise try to get rid of it. And so that is proactive. It's sort of analogous to problem-focused coping in humans, where you go out and you actively deal with the problem. Okay? It's proactive. On the other hand, reactive is almost like emotion-focused coping, where you don't do anything about the stressor, you simply kind of hide from it. And reactive coping can include immobility, which is, of course, not moving, as well as low levels of aggression. Very low. Higher levels are likely to drive it off. These perhaps are more defensive than they are offensive. And individuals are likely then to hide from new negative stimuli. They're more neophobic, perhaps. So in a way, we're getting back to that whole boldness versus shyness. Boldness is more proactive, and reactive is more shyness. On a somewhat different topic, there has been a bit of research into the connection between personality and what's called dispersal behavior. Now, for many animals, they need to go out when they reach, adulthood, or reach a certain point, and find their own territories. Now, you can either find your own territory, or you can remove someone else from their territory, or carve out your part of yours from theirs, or, but the idea here is dispersal. The idea here is going and settling new areas, going out to whole new environments, to different places, and settling those, as opposed to sticking around in the usual environment. And research on this was actually done with frogs. Your book talks about that. There were frogs that some, when they reached, adulthood, would stick around the old territory and presumably have to compete with food for the frogs already there. And some of them would go out and, say, colonize new areas. They were looking at islands off a coast. of a lake, I believe, and that they wanted to see if there was a difference between the frogs that chose to stick around the old territory where they were born in versus frogs that wound up colonizing these islands. And what they found is that the individuals that did disperse tended to be bolder. That when they were tested in terms of boldness versus shyness, that the animals that colonized these islands tended to test high on the bold spectrum. Now, this could mean that only bold animals were the ones that were setting out, but it's also true that for a number of animal species, that offspring may not have a lot of choice about whether or not they set out. They may indeed be driven out by their parents or by other individuals in the territory. And so there is a possibility that both bold and shy frogs were driven out and possibly made it to these islands, but that in the long run only the bold ones survived. That the shy frogs may not have been able to deal with this new environment in a more proactive way, in a more bold way, in a more open way, and therefore they didn't survive long enough to breed. And so therefore the only ones that survived for any length of time were the bold. You need to take into account these sorts of possible results. We can't know for sure that only the bold migrated. It might well have been, but it might also have been that everybody did. But only some survived. Only some were the best fit to their environment, as all of this goes. Actually, I think I'm going to stop here, and because the next section is fairly long, so I'll do the next section on its own.